The noise was what struck her first. Not sound frequency. Ironhaven's magical signature hit, WuDon's reformed senses, the way a market hits a child's ears after a morning of village quiet. Total, layered, and so dense she could not parse the individual signals any more than she could have parsed individual voices in a crowd of 1,000. Every surface hummed. The fugu smocks hanging in the textile quarter carried encoded patterns that broadcast diagnostic frequencies, shadow bindings woven into cloth. Zuera's signature encoding work, each garment a tiny transmitter pulsing data into the network. The iron-heavy air tasted of forge heat and something older, something that lived in the bedrock beneath the city's foundations and bled upward through every crack and joint in the ancient stone. Enchanted textiles sealed doors and windows with ward patterns that her expanded communion could now read like text. Keep out, keep safe, keep silent. She could smell the corruption. It rose from below the way heat rises from a cook fire's embers after the flames die, not visible, not dramatic, but constant. A sour note beneath the city's baseline frequency. The enskinment chamber's poisoned pulse, pumping through the root lines that converged beneath Ironhaven's foundations, and her communion translated the wrongness into taste. Metal gone rancid, iron left in water too long, the specific sourness of something that should be clean and was not. She swallowed against it, and the sourness coated the back of her throat. Samini staggered upright behind her. The old Tindana's face was the color of wet clay, his petrified staff planted in the earth with the desperate rigidity of a man using every anchor to stay standing. The root road had been harder on him. She could see it in the way his hands trembled on the staff, not the fine tremor of exertion, but the deep, structural shake of a body that had been compressed beyond its tolerance and was now trying to remember its own architecture. His eyes were unfocused. His breathing was wrong, too shallow, too fast, the breathing of someone whose lungs had been squeezed flat and were reluctant to fully reinflate. Sit, she told him. Let your body expand. He sat, heavily, without grace, the way a sack of grain sits when you drop it. She knelt beside him and pressed her palm to his back, feeling his communion stuttering beneath her touch, a lamp flame guttering in wind. The root road had cost him more than 6 hours. It had cost him something she could not name, something measured in the gray that had settled permanently into the skin around his eyes. She stayed with him until his breathing steadied. The courtyard they had surfaced in was old. Collapsed buildings, dust-choked lanes, the architecture of abandonment, a settlement bypassed by centuries of expansion, preserved by tradition, ignored by everyone except the root lines that converged beneath it with a density that made her palms itch. 5 separate lines meeting at a single junction. The original settlement, the place where Ironhaven's founders had built, because the earth itself had told them to. Then she felt the shadow. It came from below. Not from the root lines, from a space between the root lines and the surface, a layer her communion had always skipped because it operated on a frequency she could not detect. Until the guardian's chamber. Until the communion key expanded her range into registers that included the shadow bindings, proprioceptive layer, the system's sense of self, the frequency that told the architecture where its parts were in space. Something was reaching for her through that layer. A shadow binding, not hostile, purposeful. The urgency of a diagnostic instrument detecting a compatible frequency and straining to make contact the way a dowsing rod strains toward water. Her palms pressed harder against the earth. A Tindana's instinct, trained by 2 years of communion and a lifetime of listening. When something reaches for you through the ground, you reach back. The contact happened 3 feet below the surface. Her communion met the shadow in the soil between the root line layer and the packed courtyard floor, and the meeting was not a collision. It was a key turning in a lock. The sensation flooded her body before her mind could frame it. Not painful, not ecstatic. Right. The bone-deep rightness of breathing, of heartbeat, of the earth holding the sky. Her communion, the fragment that heard, that received, that translated the deep earth's language into human knowing, interlocked with the shadow, the fragment that sensed, that diagnosed, that felt the system's boundary state and reported its geometry. 2 halves of a conversation that had been conducted in monologue for 1,000 years. suddenly becoming dialogue. She felt him, not his body, his life. The exile, months of walking through territory that rejected him, sleeping in abandoned groves where the root lines whispered, "Wrong, wrong, you were pushed away, you do not belong." The hunger that had sharpened his face to angles. The stubbornness that had kept him walking when the hunger said stop. And the gray, she could feel the gray hairs that had come in the months since the rejection, each one a record of a night spent sleeping on hard ground with a shadow that would not stop reaching for something it could not find. She felt his loneliness the way she felt weather as a physical pressure, a temperature, something the body registered before the mind had language for it. And he felt her. She knew because the shadow bindings reach changed from straining to settling, from searching to finding. He felt her depth, the grove where she had trained, the guardian's chamber, the ancient voice that had pressed its message into her bones. She was a well, and he was thirsty, and the water table had just risen to meet the bucket. She lifted her head. He stood at the courtyard's edge, late 20s. Lean with the particular leanness of exile, not the compact efficiency of a farmer's body, but the stripped-down minimalism of a man whose meals had been irregular and whose muscles had learned to function on less. His clothes carried the harmattan's mineral dust. His face was sharp, watchful, the face of someone who read landscapes for threat before beauty. Gray streaked his temples, wrong for his age, right for his suffering, and his shadow stretched across the sunlit courtyard in defiance of optics, reaching for her with the focused intensity of a compass needle finding north. "You are the rejected one,"
she said. The contact had already confirmed it. His shadow carried the thread of the true enskinment bond, thin and trembling and unbroken, stretching from his darkness to the real skin buried beneath the corruption. As in Do. His voice was steady, his shadow was not. "And you are the listener."
"Wunam." She stood. The interlocking held once established. The fragments maintained themselves the way clasped hands maintain their grip, the connection living in the system's frequency register, now permanent until deliberately cut. She did not need to touch the ground. She was the ground, in a sense that her training had not prepared her for. She extended her hand, palm down, toward the earth, the Tindana's gesture of communion trust. An invitation witnessed by root lines and guardians and the thousand-year murmur of ancestors who had been waiting for this handshake since the day the factions tore the system apart. Azindor extended his shadow. The formal interlocking was deeper than the instinctive contact. Where the first touch had been recognition, this was choice. Two fragments connecting not by reflex, but by will. The shadow's diagnostic array merged with her communion's receptive depth, and the combined awareness bloomed outward from the courtyard to the chamber to the sealed nodes to every surviving grove in the territories. For one moment, she felt the system whole. Every root line, every shadow binding, every encoding frequency, every enskinment bond. The architecture of a world's magic perceived through two reconnected fragments, and the perception was not abstract. She was inside the system's body the way a nerve is inside the body it inhabits, and the body was hurt and healing and hoping, all three at once, and the feeling was so large she could not hold it without her eyes filling. The moment passed. The totality faded to a manageable two-fragment awareness, but the memory would live in her body forever. The memory of wholeness. The memory of what the Zagale lost when the factions broke their world into pieces and called the pieces their own. "Two down," she said, steady, eyes bright. "The last pattern is here. I can feel the encoding frequency at the western wall. Someone arrived this morning." The encoding signature was distinctive. Wunam could taste it through the shadow bindings data feed a weaving frequency, precise and mathematical, the work of someone who understood the Zagale's geometric language and was using it to encode messages in cloth. Zuwera, the name surfaced from the network's own memory, attached to the frequency like a label attached to a jar. The last pattern, the weaver who had found the ancient loom. And there, at the edge of her expanded perception, a gap, not a signal but the absence of one. A space in the frequency map where a person should register and did not. a hole in the shape of a soldier, broadcasting nothing, absorbing nothing, existing outside the system's awareness the way a stone exists outside a river's current. Tibigia, the communion could not see him. The shadow binding could not sense him. He was a blank, and the blankness was more unsettling than any corruption because the system was built to perceive everything within its architecture, and this man was not within it. He was beside it, parallel to it, a ghost in a world of voices. WuDon filed the observation the way Samini had taught her to file anomalies during communion. Noted, stored, revisited later when context made it legible.
A woman emerged from a passage behind Azindo, white-haired, carrying the bearing of authority that derived from sources deeper than appointment. WuDon recognized her through the root lines before her face, resolved the earth bond was a distinctive frequency, and Pogna Zara's bond was strong and old, and carried the harmonic of a woman who had maintained her connection to the land for 4 decades. Pogna Zara, Samini said from behind WuDon. He had risen. His staff struck the earth in the Tindana salute. I did not expect the earth bonded in the old quarter.
And I did not expect a Tindana master traveling the route roads the circle forbade.
Her voice was controlled. Her frequency was not. WuDon could read the woman's state through the interlocked fragments, elevated stress, suppressed guilt, the harmonic of someone watching their past arrive in physical form. Azindo looked at WuDon. Through the shadow communion link, she felt his question before he spoke it. Can we trust her? She answered through the same link, not in words but in the frequency of certainty. The guardian sent me. I carry the message. Trust is what we have left.
The candidate is coming from the east. WuDon said aloud. On foot, tomorrow.
And the cage maker?
Pogna Zara asked. WuDon pressed her palm to the courtyard floor. The root lines beneath blazed, and through them from below the corruption's pulse, stronger here, rhythmic. The enskinment chamber's poisoned frequency pumping through the network like venom through a vein, and inside the corruption, wearing it the way a man wears a stolen smock, a presence. Half familiar, half alien, the part of him that was still human broadcast fear. The part that was obsidian broadcast hunger. She felt Tohage through the root lines, and the root lines flinched. Not metaphorically. The actual root line network contracted a physical recoil that traveled outward from the corruption source like a shudder traveling through a body. The earth was rejecting him. The system he had woven himself into was trying to push him out the way a body pushes out a splinter, and failing because he had threaded himself too deeply and the extraction would kill the host. And beneath the earth's rejection, the obsidian, rippling, she could feel it through the deepest root lines, a vibration that did not belong to stone or to man but to something caught between the two and terrified of both. The obsidian had felt the interlocking. It had felt 2 fragments reconnect, and it was afraid.
He knows we are here, WuDon said. He felt the connection. His obsidian is. She searched for the word. Frightened. The stone half of his face is frightened.
Silence. The courtyard held it the way a bowl holds water.
Then we do not have until Demba. Azindo said. His shadow was coiled tight around his feet, defensive, the diagnostic array processing the data WuDon's communion was feeding it. We have until he decides to act.
2 days until the alignment. 2 fragments connected, 2 more converging. And beneath them, in the chamber where corruption and obsidian and stolen power pulsed in the rhythm of a man who had tried to become a system and was discovering that the system did not want him, Tohage felt the interlocking, and the half of his face that could still move did not smile. The obsidian rippled, the root lines shuddered, and the earth beneath Ironhaven held its breath, counting the hours until something broke.